No man wanted to marry this single mother, but the mountain man gave her a chance. On the dusty street, with her child clinging to her skirt, the townsfolk laugh and point. The church bell tolls. The cattle baron sneers. To them, she's too poor, too fat, too broken to ever be loved. Then boots strike the dirt. A mountain man steps forward, eyes burning with something no one else dares show: respect. But the moment he offers her a home, a storm begins to gather. Because the richest rancher in the territory wants her land, her boy, and even her hand, and he'll stop at nothing to take them. A sick child. A cruel bargain. A fight for justice written not on paper, but in blood and faith. What will she choose when her son's life hangs in the balance? And will the love of one mountain man be enough to silence a whole town's laughter? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The morning sun cast long shadows across Willow Creek's main street as Karen May Turner guided her tired wagon toward the center of town. Her wooden wheels creaked over the rutted dirt road, each bump making her wince. Beside her on the wagon seat, little Josiah's stomach growled loud enough for her to hear. "Mama, I'm awful hungry," he whispered, his small hand clutching at her sleeve. Karen touched his cheek, feeling the dust that had collected there during their long journey. "I know, sweetheart. We'll find something soon." The boarding house stood like a beacon of hope at the edge of the town square, its weathered signs swaying in the morning breeze. Karen gathered her courage and climbed down from the wagon, her feet aching in her worn boots. Josiah scrambled down after her, staying close to her skirts as they approached the front door. The boarding house matron, a thin woman with iron gray hair pulled tight against her scalp, answered Karen's quiet knock. Her sharp eyes took in Karen's full figure and travel-stained clothes, then darted to Josiah's hopeful face. "We're looking for a room, ma'am," Karen said softly. "Just until we can find proper lodging." The matron's mouth pinched tight. "Already got too many mouths to feed," she declared, her voice carrying across the porch. "Besides, we're particular about who we take in." A group of men lounging outside the general store across the way snickered. "Reckon she'd eat more than her share," one called out, just loud enough to be heard. Heat rushed to Karen's cheeks, but she kept her chin up. Josiah pressed closer to her side, his small fingers digging into her skirt. "Thank you for your time," Karen managed, turning away with all the dignity she could muster. As they walked back to their wagon, she heard boys whispering and laughing behind their hands. The sound cut deep, reminding her of similar taunts she'd endured since childhood. They led their tired horse to the livery stable, where the kind-faced stable master allowed them to park their wagon in the yard. As the sun sank toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold, Karen pulled out their last heel of bread from their traveling supplies. She broke it carefully in two, giving Josiah the larger portion. They sat together on the wagon's back step, watching the town settle into evening. The bread was hard and dry, but Karen chewed slowly, making each bite last. Josiah finished his piece quickly, then looked up at her with eyes that seemed too old for his young face. "Mama," he said quietly, "will we ever have a real home again? Like we did with Papa?" Karen's heart clenched at the mention of her late husband. She forced a smile, though tears pricked at her eyes. "Of course we will, darling. The Lord will provide. We just have to keep faith and work hard." Josiah nodded solemnly and leaned against her side. She wrapped her arm around him, drawing comfort from his warm presence as much as he did from hers. The next morning, church bells rang out across Willow Creek, their sound mixing with the general bustle of auction day. Karen stood before their wagon, straightening her best dress, faded but clean, and retying Josiah's small neckerchief. "Remember what I told you," she said softly. "Stand tall and be brave. We're as good as anyone else here." "Yes, Mama," Josiah answered, though his lower lip trembled slightly. Karen took a deep breath and smoothed her skirts one last time. Her heart thundered against her ribs as they walked toward the public square, where crowds were already gathering. She felt the stares and heard the whispers, but kept her eyes forward, holding Josiah's hand tight. The auction block loomed ahead, a simple wooden platform that suddenly seemed as tall as a mountain. Karen knew she would have to face those judgmental eyes, those crude whispers, if she hoped to find work or lodging. Her legs felt weak, but she straightened her spine and lifted her chin. "The Lord is my shepherd," she whispered to herself, drawing on the strength of her faith. "I shall not want." Josiah squeezed her hand, and in that moment, she found the courage to take another step forward. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The bells continued to toll, marking the official start of auction day, and Karen steeled herself for what lay ahead. She had nothing but her cooking skills, her willingness to work, and her love for her son. She prayed it would be enough that the auction yard hummed with activity as townspeople gathered under the morning sun. Ladies in their Sunday best huddled in tight circles, whispering behind gloved hands, while men in dusty work clothes lounged against the weathered fence posts, trading stories and tobacco. The air crackled with excitement and meanness in equal measure. Karen held Josiah's hand tight as they made their way through the crowd. Her worn boots kicked up little clouds of dust with each step, and she could feel curious eyes following their progress. The auctioneer, a round-faced man in a striped vest, stood arranging his papers on a rough wooden podium. "Excuse me, sir," Karen said, her voice barely carrying over the crowd's chatter. "I was wondering if you might know of any work available, or perhaps a place to board." Before the auctioneer could respond, a sharp laugh cut through the morning air. The crowd parted like water around a stone as Asa Greeley stepped forward, his expensive boots clicking against the hard-packed earth. His silver watch chain glinted in the sunlight as he adjusted his vest, a cruel smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Well, Greeley drawled, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Looks like we've got ourselves an interesting proposition here." He gestured broadly at Karen, making sure all eyes were on her. "Though I reckon no man in his right mind would take on such a substantial burden, let alone with a boy in tow." Laughter rippled through the crowd. A group of men near Greeley's shoulder guffawed openly, elbowing each other and pointing at Karen's figure. She felt her face flush hot with shame, but forced herself to stand straight, though her hands trembled. Josiah pressed closer to her side, his small fingers clutching at her skirts. "Mama?" he whispered, confusion and fear making his voice waver. "Why are they laughing?" The sound of her son's distress cut deeper than any mockery. Karen opened her mouth to speak, to defend herself somehow, but the words stuck in her throat as more townspeople joined in the cruel laughter. Greeley took another step forward, clearly enjoying his moment of power. "Truth is, woman, you best move along. Willow Creek's got standards to maintain," and a shadow fell across the yard, sudden as a thundercloud. The laughter died away as a tall figure stepped into the space between Karen and Greeley. The stranger's presence seemed to fill the whole yard, though he moved with the quiet grace of a mountain cat. Elijah Boone stood head and shoulders above most men present, his broad shoulders straight beneath his worn buckskin coat. His beard was neatly trimmed despite his frontier appearance, and his eyes, when they met Karen's, were steady and clear as mountain springs. With deliberate care, he removed his wide-brimmed hat, revealing dark hair touched with silver at the temples. When he spoke, his voice was deep and gentle, but it carried to every corner of the suddenly silent yard. "Ma'am," he said, addressing Karen directly while keeping himself between her and Greeley, "if no one else sees your worth, I surely do." The words hung in the air like a challenge and a promise both. Karen found herself staring up into his face, unable to look away. His expression held no mockery, no cruel humor, only a quiet strength and something that might have been kindness. She realized she was holding her breath and let it out slowly. Josiah's grip on her skirts loosened slightly as he peered around her at the tall stranger who had stopped the laughter. The auction yard remained dead silent. Even Greeley seemed at a loss for words, his usual smirk faltering in the face of Boone's steady presence. The women who had been whispering now stood stock still, fans frozen mid-wave. The morning breeze rustled through the silence, carrying with it the fresh scent of pine from the distant mountains. Corinne's heart thundered in her chest as she met Elijah's gaze. In his eyes, she saw something she hadn't dared hope for since arriving in Willow Creek: respect. Simple, honest respect, offered freely and without condition. Her throat tightened with emotion she couldn't quite name. The moments stretched between them, full of unspoken possibilities, until it seemed the whole world had narrowed to just this: a dusty auction yard, a defender's quiet words, and the first flicker of hope in a weary heart. The auction crowd dispersed in tight clusters, their whispers carried on the morning breeze. Some cast furtive glances over their shoulders at the unlikely trio still standing in the yard: the mountain man, the widow, and her small son. Karen's hands twisted in her worn skirts, her mind racing with the sudden turn of events. Elijah turned to face her fully, his hat still held respectfully in his weathered hands. "Ma'am, I've got a cabin up in the hills. It ain't much, but it's dry and warm. You and your boy would be welcome there while you sort things out." Corinne's breath caught in her throat. The offer was generous, more than generous, but she hesitated, all too aware of the watching eyes and wagging tongues. "Mr. Boone, I don't know what to say. The scandal of it. Ain't nothing scandalous about offering shelter to those in need," Elijah said firmly. His voice was quiet, meant only for her ears. "I've got a separate room with its own door. You'll have your privacy, and your reputation will stay intact." Josiah tugged at her skirt, his eyes bright with hope. "Can we, Mama, please? I'm so tired of sleeping in the wagon." Karen studied Elijah's face, searching for any hint of deception or ill intent. But she found only patience, and that same steady respect he'd shown in front of the crowd. His eyes were clear as mountain streams, holding her gaze without demanding anything in return. "Very well," she said at last, squaring her shoulders. "We accept your kind offer, Mr. Boone." Relief softened his features. "Much obliged, ma'am. Let's get your things loaded up before the weather turns." They made quick work of transferring Karen's meager possessions from her small wagon to Elijah's sturdy pack horse. The animal stood quietly, used to bearing heavier loads up mountain trails. Once the boxes and bundles were secured, Elijah lifted Josiah onto the horse's broad back. The boy's delighted laugh rang out across the yard, a sound Karen hadn't heard in weeks. It made her own heart feel lighter. Despite her lingering uncertainty, Dot from the doorway of the mercantile, Asa Greeley watched their preparations. His face was twisted in a sneer, and his eyes held a calculating darkness that made Corinne shiver. She turned away, focusing instead on checking the ropes that held their belongings. The autumn sun was high overhead when they finally started out, taking the trail that led north toward the mountains. Elijah walked ahead, leading the pack horse with one hand while his rifle rested easily in the crook of his other arm. Karen followed, her steps growing steadier as the town fell away behind them. Dot as evening approached. They made camp in a small clearing beside the trail. Pine trees swayed overhead, their branches whispering in the cooling air. Elijah efficiently set up a camp, starting a fire and arranging logs for seating while Karen unpacked her cooking supplies. Soon, the savory smell of stew filled the clearing. Karen stirred the pot hanging over the flames, adding the last of her dried herbs. It wasn't much, just beans, salt pork, and a few withered vegetables, but it would fill their bellies. "Smells mighty fine," Elijah said, accepting the tin cup she handed him. After tasting it, he added, "Tastes even better." Been a long while since I had proper cooking. Josiah sat cross-legged near the fire, shoveling spoonfuls into his mouth with enthusiasm. Between bites, he chattered about everything he'd seen on the trail: deer tracks, hawk nests, and the changing colors of the leaves. Elijah listened attentively, offering gentle corrections when the boy's imagination ran wild with his observations. Karen ate slowly, watching their interaction. The firelight cast dancing shadows across their faces, and for the first time in months, she felt something close to peace. Yet uncertainty still gnawed at her edges. What sort of man was Elijah Boone, really? What had moved him to stand up for her so boldly, to offer his home to strangers? They settled down to sleep with the fire banked low between them. Karen and Josiah shared her quilts on one side, while Elijah took the other, his rifle close at hand. Despite her unease, Karen found comfort in his steady presence and the quiet way he'd arranged things to protect her dignity. When dawn broke, frost glittered on the pine needles overhead. They ate a simple breakfast of cornbread and coffee before continuing their journey. As they climbed higher, the valley grew distant below them, Willow Creek shrinking to a cluster of tiny buildings beside its namesake stream. Josiah rode proudly atop the pack horse, pointing out every new sight with excitement. Karen walked beside him, one hand resting on his leg to steady him, while Elijah led them sure-footed up the mountain trail. With each step away from town, Karen felt the weight of yesterday's humiliation lifting slightly, replaced by cautious hope for what lay ahead. The mountain trail twisted higher, patches of early snow dusting the ground between pine needles. Elijah's steady stride never faltered as he led them upward, though he paused often to let Karen and the pack horse catch their breath in the thinning air. "Weather up here can turn mighty quick," Elijah explained, pointing to clouds gathering over distant peaks. "Gotta know the signs. Dark clouds coming fast from the northwest usually mean snow's on its way." Josiah leaned forward on the pack horse, drinking in every word. "What happens when it snows, Mr. Boone?" "Well, son, that's when proper planning saves lives. Come winter, we need enough firewood split and stacked to last months. Plenty of dried meat and preserved food stored away, too." Elijah's voice carried the weight of experience. "And always got to keep watch for wolves. They get bold when snow's deep and game's scarce." "Real wolves?" Josiah's eyes widened. "Have you ever shot one?" "Only when necessary," Elijah replied carefully. "Most times, they'll leave folks be if you respect their territory and keep your distance." Karen listened to their exchange, noting how Elijah never dismissed Josiah's endless questions. Instead, he answered each one with patience, teaching without talking down to the boy. The trail finally opened onto a sunlit clearing. There stood Elijah's cabin, solid logs chinked with clay, a stone chimney reaching skyward. Smoke curled from its top, and Karen noticed a lean-to shed attached to one side. "My neighbor Thomas checks on things when I'm away," Elijah explained, seeing her questioning look at the smoke. "Keeps the hearth warm if he knows I'm heading back." Inside, the cabin was surprisingly cozy. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, its warmth reaching every corner. Rough-hewn shelves held rows of dried meat, cured hides, and preserves in glass jars. A wooden table with 3 chairs stood in the center, while a curtained doorway led to what must be the separate room he'd mentioned, Karen's. Hands itched to bring order to the bachelor's space. Though clean enough, it needed a woman's touch. Without thinking, she began straightening, arranging, making small improvements that would turn the cabin from shelter to home. Elijah watched her for a moment, then turned to Josiah. "Come on, young fellow. Time you learned about chopping kindling." Through the window, Karen watched them at the chopping block. Elijah showed Josiah how to hold the small axe safely, guiding his hands through the motions. When the boy split his first piece of wood, Elijah's praise made Josiah stand straighter. "Well done. That's right, smart work there. Keep your thumb tucked, just like that, and you'll do fine. As the afternoon wore on, Karen found herself humming as she worked, something she hadn't done since before her husband died. She unpacked their few belongings, hanging her dresses beside Elijah's shirts on pegs along the wall. Her quilt brightened the bed in the side room, and Josiah's wooden soldiers stood at attention on the WINDOWSILL dot when the evening came. They gathered around the table. Steam rose from bowls of rabbit stew, and fresh-baked biscuits filled the cabin with their homey scent. Josiah proudly told Karen about his woodchopping lessons while Elijah listened, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Something shifted in Karen's heart as she looked around the table. This simple meal, shared in the warm firelight, felt right in a way she couldn't explain. For the first time since leaving Missouri, she felt the stirrings of belonging. After supper, she tucked Josiah into bed in their separate room. The boy was asleep almost before his head touched the pillow, worn out from the day's excitement. Karen pulled his quilt up to his chin, smoothing back his dark hair. When she returned to the main room, Elijah stood by the fireplace, his usual confidence seeming somehow softer in the flickering light. "Thank you, Mrs. Turner," he said quietly. "For what?" "For bringing life back into this cabin." His eyes met hers steadily. Been too long since these walls heard a child's laughter or a woman's song. Heat rose in Karen's cheeks at his words. Since her husband's death, she'd grown used to men's cruel jests or dismissive glances. This simple gratitude, spoken with such genuine warmth, touched something deep within her. I should thank you, Mr. Boone," she managed. "For everything?" He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Get some rest now? Tomorrow's soon enough for whatever needs doing next." Karen slipped into her room, her heart beating strangely. Through the wall, she could hear Elijah banking the fire for the night, his movements sure and steady in his familiar space. She lay down beside Josiah, listening to her son's peaceful breathing and the quiet sounds of the mountain night, wondering at how quickly this place had begun to feel like home. Day settled into a gentle rhythm at the mountain cabin. Each morning, Karen rose before dawn to stoke the fire and start the day's baking. The smell of fresh bread soon filled every corner, drawing Josiah from his bed with sleepy eyes and tousled hair. Elijah worked from sunup to sundown, his axe ringing through the crisp mountain air. The woodpile grew steadily higher as he prepared for the coming winter. Sometimes Karen caught herself watching him through the window, admiring the sure strength in his movements and the careful way he stacked each log. "Mama, look what Mr. Boone showed me." Josiah would call out several times a day, proudly displaying new treasures, pine cones, interesting rocks, or turkey feathers found during their walks. Under Elijah's patient guidance, the boy learned to identify animal tracks and bird calls. His eyes sparkled with each new discovery. Karen marveled at the change in her son. Gone was the quiet, withdrawn child from their first days in Willow Creek. In his place stood a curious, confident boy who chattered endlessly about his adventures with Mr. Boone. Yet doubt gnawed at her heart. During quiet moments, was Elijah's kindness mere pity for a widow and her fatherless son? Word spread through town, twisted by Asa Greeley's malicious tongue. "That fat widow's got her claws in the mountain man," he drawled to anyone who'd listen, lounging against the general store's porch rail. Trapped a trapper, she did. Probably bewitched him somehow. When Sunday arrived, Karen insisted they attend church. "Josiah needs proper schooling in the Word," she explained to Elijah, who nodded without argument. They rode into town together, Karen and Josiah in the wagon, while Elijah rode alongside on his horse. The morning sun couldn't warm the chill of townspeople's stares. Women whispered behind their prayer books. Men nudged each other, smirking. The small wooden church was packed when they entered. Karen held her head high, though her cheeks burned as conversation stopped mid-sentence. They found seats near the back. Josiah between them. Reverend Matthews preached about faith tested by trials, about perseverance in the face of judgment. "The Lord sees not as man sees," he intoned, his voice filling the hushed sanctuary. "For man looks on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart." Karen felt the words sink deep into her soul, even as she noticed several women pointedly turn their backs when she met their eyes. After the service, families gathered outside to visit. Karen tried making conversation with the minister's wife, but the woman made a thin excuse and hurried away. A group of boys Josiah's age huddled nearby, pointing and snickering. "Look at the bear cub," one called out. "Bet his mama ate all their food. That's why they had to move to the mountain." Josiah's face crumpled. Elijah's jaw tightened, his hands clenching into fists. But before he could move, Karen placed a gentle hand on his arm. "We must rise above it," she said softly, though her own heart ached for her son. Their cruel words show their own weakness, not ours. The ride home was quiet. Josiah slumped in the wagon, picking at a loose thread on his Sunday shirt. Even the horses seemed to sense the heavy mood, their hooves striking the dusty road in subdued rhythm. That evening, after Josiah was asleep, Karen sat by the fire mending one of his shirts. Her needle moved steadily, but tears splashed silently onto the fabric. The day's hurts pressed down like a physical weight. Elijah lit a lantern and set it on the table beside her. Its warm glow pushed back the shadows gathering in the corners of the room. He pulled up a chair, the wood creaking softly beneath his weight. "They don't know what I see," he said. Simply, Karen's hands stilled on her mending. "And what do you see?" She whispered, hardly daring to look up. "I see a mother who'd move mountains for her boy. A woman with more courage in her little finger than those town gossips have in their whole bodies." His voice was low and steady. "I see someone who makes this cabin feel like a home for the first time since I built it." The tears fell faster now, but Karen didn't try to hide them. Elijah's words wrapped around her like a warm blanket, chasing away the chill of the townspeople's rejection. "Thank you," she managed, her voice thick with emotion. The lantern light caught the wetness on her cheeks, turning the tears to gold. Winter descended on the mountain like a heavy blanket, wrapping the cabin in deep drifts of pristine snow. The world beyond their clearing grew distant, accessible only during brief breaks between storms. Inside, warmth radiated from the sturdy stone fireplace where pine logs crackled and sparked. Each evening, Karen sat with Josiah at the rough-hewn table, a single lamp casting golden light across warm pages. Her finger traced beneath each word as Josiah followed along, his tongue poking out in concentration. "Sound it out, sweetheart," she encouraged, watching his brow furrow. "Remember what we learned about the letter combinations?" "The through," Josiah managed, beaming with pride when Karen nodded. "Through the woods to grandmother's house." From his place by the fire, Elijah looked up from his work, smiling at the boy's achievement. His strong hands moved steadily, weaving strips of rawhide through the wooden frames that would become snowshoes. The familiar motions were automatic after years of practice, leaving him free to enjoy the peaceful scene before him. "Reckon you'll be reading trail signs next," Elijah said, his deep voice warm with approval. "Reminds me of tracking my first elk. Must have been about your age." Josiah abandoned his lesson instantly, scrambling closer to hear the story. Karen watched fondly as Elijah described the massive tracks in fresh snow, the way the bull elk's breath had steamed in the frozen air. His words painted pictures that held Josiah spellbound, and even Karen found herself leaning forward, caught up in the tale. Later, after Josiah was tucked into his bed, Karen worked in the kitchen area, rolling out pastry for pies. The familiar task usually brought comfort, but tonight her thoughts wandered down painful paths. The dough beneath her rolling pin seemed to mock her, spreading wider just like her own figure had over the years. "Something troubling you?" Elijah asked quietly, noting her distracted expression. Karen's hand stilled on the rolling pin. I was just thinking. She hesitated. Then the words spilled out in a rush. About what those ladies at church said. About how no man would want. She gestured at herself, face burning with shame. Someone plain and heavy like me. Elijah crossed the room in 2 long strides. His calloused fingers caught her chin, lifting it gently until she had to meet his steady gaze. Karen, he said, his voice rough with emotion. You're the strongest, finest woman I've known. The simple words struck deep, melting years of accumulated hurt. Karen felt tears well up, but these were different from the bitter ones she'd shed before. Elijah's thumb brushed one away as it fell. You fill this cabin with more than just cooking and cleaning, he continued softly. You bring life and laughter and light. Don't let anyone make you doubt your worth. Karen's heart swelled with feelings she'd thought long buried. The warmth in Elijah's eyes held no pity, only genuine admiration and something deeper that made her pulse quicken. A few days later, the storms paused long enough for the sun to break through. Elijah appeared at breakfast with a wooden sled he'd crafted in secret moments. There's a lake not far, he announced. Perfect day for some fun. Josiah bounced with excitement as they bundled up in warm clothes. The trek through the snow-laden forest was slow but beautiful. Crystalline branches sparkled overhead, and their boots squeaked against the powder. The lake spread before them like polished glass, surrounded by white frosted pines. Elijah tested the ice carefully before helping Josiah onto the sled. Hold tight now, he instructed, then began pulling the boy across the smooth surface. Josiah's delighted squeals echoed off the surrounding hills as Elijah picked up speed, making wide turns that sent snow spraying. Karen watched from the bank, her heart light with joy. When was the last time she'd heard her son laugh like that? When was the last time she'd felt so free herself? Your turn, Elijah called, helping Josiah off the sled. Oh, I couldn't possibly. Karen protested, but Josiah was already tugging her forward. Please, Mama? It's so much fun. Carefully, she settled onto the sled, gripping the sides. Elijah's strong hands took the rope, and suddenly they were gliding across the ice. Wind kissed her cheeks as they picked up speed, and a laugh bubbled up from deep inside her. It felt like flying. That evening, as they warmed themselves by the fire, Karen realized something had shifted. The sorrow that had been her constant companion since her husband's death felt lighter, less consuming. In its place grew something new and tender, like the first green shoots of spring pushing through winter snow. Spring crept into the mountains slowly, melting snow into rivulets that carved paths down to the valley below. When the muddy roads finally hardened enough for wagon travel, Elijah hitched up his team for a supply run to Willow Creek. Karen had spent the morning making lists, checking their stores of sugar, coffee, and flour. Best we all go together, Elijah said, helping Karen up onto the wagon seat. Store's got some new calico in that might suit you. His gentle smile warmed her heart as he lifted Josiah up between them. The ride down was pleasant. Wildflowers dotting the meadows and birds calling from greening branches. Josiah pointed out every deer and rabbit they passed, while Karen found herself humming softly. These past months in the cabin had brought such peace. Sometimes it felt like a dream. That peace shattered the moment they reached town. Though the streets were busy with spring trading, folks turned away when they passed. Outside the general store, Karen noticed a cluster of men watching them with unfriendly eyes. Inside, the store bell jangled as they entered. Mr. Peterson, usually chatty, barely nodded as Elijah placed their order. Karen was examining fabric when heavy boots struck the wooden floor behind them. Well, if it ain't the mountain man and his family. Asa Greeley's voice dripped with mockery. He stood blocking the doorway. Elegant coat stretched across his broad chest. a leather folio tucked under one arm. Elijah turned slowly, positioning himself between Asa and Karen. "Greeley," he said evenly. "What brings you by?" "Funny you should ask." Asa's smile didn't reach his eyes as he pulled papers from his folio. "Seems I'm looking at my new property. Your land claim, to be precise." The store went silent. Karen's fingers clutched the fabric bolt so tight her knuckles went white. Josiah pressed against her skirts, sensing the tension. "That's not possible," Elijah said quietly. "I filed those papers proper, paid every fee. Did you now?" Asa spread the documents across the counter. "Because according to these, signed by the Territory Office last month, that parcel of land belongs to me. Lock, stock, and cabin." Karen's heart pounded as she studied Elijah's face. His expression remained calm, but she saw the muscle working in his jaw. After years of trapping and saving, he'd chosen that land carefully, built everything with his own hands. "Those papers ain't right," Elijah said firmly. "And you know it, do I?" Asa's laugh was sharp. "Way I see it, you're squatting on my property. Now, I'm a reasonable man. I'll give you 2 weeks to clear out before I have the sheriff remove you." Karen stepped forward, gripping Elijah's arm. The thought of losing their home, of losing the life they'd built together, made her chest tight with fear. "Mr. Peterson," Elijah called to the storekeeper. "We'll take our supplies now." The older man shuffled his feet. "Thing is, Elijah, my credit with the wholesalers is tight. Can't afford the risk." He trailed off, unable to meet their eyes. One by one, they tried other merchants. Each time, they were turned away with mumbled excuses. Karen knew Asa's influence ran deep. Few dared cross the wealthy rancher. The wagon ride home was quiet, the spring beauty dimmed by worry. Josiah huddled close to Karen, his small face troubled. "Papa Elijah?" he asked in a small voice. "Are they going to make us leave our home?" Elijah's hands tightened on the reins. "No, son," he said firmly. "I promise you both, I won't let that happen. This is our home, and we'll fight for it proper and legal." That evening, after Josiah was asleep, Karen found Elijah at the table, studying his own land documents by lamplight. His broad shoulders were tense with worry. "Something's not right with those papers," he said as she sat beside him. "The dating, the signatures, it doesn't add up. Asa's got friends in the land office, but there's still law in this territory. I've got to write to Denver, speak to the head agent myself. When will you go?" Karen asked softly. "Soon as I can arrange it." "Maybe next week." He looked up at her, his eyes troubled. "I hate leaving you both alone. We'll manage," Karen assured him, covering his rough hand with her own. "I trust you, Elijah. I trust your strength and your faith that right will prevail." His fingers tightened around hers. Without words, they knelt together beside the fireplace, their clasped hands bridging the space between them. The flames cast flickering shadows as they bowed their heads in prayer, asking for guidance and protection on the path ahead. The weeks stretched long as they waited for word from Denver. Each day, Elijah watched for the mail carrier's approach along the mountain trail, but replies from the land office were slow in coming. His letters, carefully written at the cabin table, detailed the history of his claim and his suspicions about Asa's fraudulent papers. Karen noticed their stores dwindling as merchants in town continued turning them away. She stretched their supplies carefully, mixing cornmeal into the precious wheat flour to make their daily bread last longer. The loaves came out darker and coarser, but she refused to let worry show on her face as she served them. One evening, while helping clear the supper dishes, Josiah's small voice broke the quiet. "Mama, why do people in town hate us so much?" Karen's hands stilled in the wash basin. She dried them slowly on her apron before drawing Josiah close. "They don't hate us, sweetheart. Some folks just let envy and cruelty into their hearts instead of kindness. But that's their burden to bear, not ours. Is it because of Mr. Greeley?" Josiah pressed, his young face troubled. Mr. Greeley has forgotten how to be generous, she answered softly, smoothing his hair. But we must pray for him all the same. The morning sun was barely touching the treetops when Elijah set out to check his trap lines. The spring air held a bite of lingering winter as he moved quietly through the forest. Near the creek that marked his property line, voices carried through the trees. He crept closer, rifle ready. 3 of ICE's men stood marking trees with red paint, their horses ground-tied nearby. Elijah recognized Jake Morton, ACE's foreman, among them. They were laughing, slapping paint on the trunks that had stood sentinel over his land for years. "This here's private property," Elijah called out, stepping into view. His voice was calm but carried authority. "You've no right to be marking these trees." Jake turned with an exaggerated smile. "Private property is right. Mr. Greeley's property. He sent us to mark timber for cutting. These trees ain't his to cut," Elijah stated firmly. "And you know it. Look here, mountain man," Jake sneered. "Why don't you save yourself some trouble? Take your woman and that boy of hers back where they came from. Ain't natural, you playing house with another man's leavings." Elijah's hands tightened on his rifle, but his voice remained steady. "I'm warning you fair. Get off my land. Next time I catch you trespassing, there'll be consequences." The men mounted up, but Jake couldn't resist a parting shot. "Consequences? Better watch yourself, Boone. Accidents happen in these mountains all the time." That evening, Karen tucked Josiah into his small bed in the corner of the cabin. The boy was still unsettled from seeing the marked trees earlier, his eyes wide with worry in the lamplight. Karen's clear voice lifted in a gentle hymn, singing of peace and protection. Gradually, Josiah's eyes grew heavy, and he drifted to sleep clutching his worn quilt. Karen joined Elijah by the hearth, where he sat watching the flames. Without speaking, she poured 2 cups of precious coffee and settled beside him. The firelight cast dancing shadows on the cabin walls as they sat in comfortable silence. "I never thought I'd have this," Elijah said finally, his deep voice quiet. "All those years in the mountains, I lived for myself. Trapping, trading, moving with the seasons. Didn't need nothing else." He paused, turning the cup in his rough hands. "But now, having you both here, it's like the Lord opened my eyes to what I was missing. Lord opened my eyes to what I was missing." Karen's heart quickened at his words. She had seen him as her protector, a shelter from the storm of gossip and cruel judgment. But now, watching his strong profile in the firelight, she recognized something deeper. The way his eyes softened when they met hers, how his hand found excuses to brush hers, the gentle patience he showed Josiah. This wasn't just protection. This was love, steady and true as the mountains themselves. "We're blessed to have found you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Whatever comes, we'll face it together." Elijah's hand covered hers where it rested on the bench between them. Outside, an owl called into the darkness, and the wind whispered through the marked trees. But inside the cabin, in the circle of firelight, Karen felt safer than she had in years. Wrapped in the quiet strength of Elijah's love, by midsummer, the mountain meadow blazed with color. Purple lupine swayed in the breeze alongside bright orange Indian paintbrush and delicate white yarrow. The afternoon sun warmed the clearing where Elijah's cabin stood. As he and Karen prepared for their gathering, Karen smoothed her best calico dress, watching through the window as Elijah arranged rough-hewn benches around the outdoor fire pit. He'd invited the Hendersons and the Wilsons, families who had shown them kindness despite Ace's influence. The smell of roasting venison filled the air as the meat turned slowly on a spit. "Mama, can I show everyone my new whistle?" Josiah bounced on his toes beside her, clutching the wooden instrument Elijah had carved for him. "Of course, sweetheart," Karen smiled, straightening his collar. "Just remember what we talked about, waiting for the right moment." The first wagon rattled up the trail just as Karen pulled her berry cobbler from the cook stove. Sarah Henderson's cheerful voice carried across the yard, followed by her 3 children racing to greet Josiah. Tom Wilson and his wife Martha arrived shortly after, bringing fresh churned butter and a jar of honey dot. The afternoon unfolded in easy fellowship. Children played tag between the wildflowers while the adults scattered around the fire pit, passing plates loaded with venison, cornbread, and summer vegetables from Karen's garden. Laughter echoed off the mountainside, and Karen felt tears prick her eyes at the simple joy of belonging. "Watch this," Josiah called out, producing his whistle. He played the simple tune Elijah had taught him, the clear notes floating on the breeze. The other children gathered around, begging for turns. "That's mighty fine craftsmanship," Tom Wilson commented, examining the whistle. "You've got quite a talent, Elijah." "Much obliged," Elijah replied, his eyes finding Karen's across the gathering. "The Lord bless me with good hands and better company to share the work with," as the sun began its descent behind the peaks, casting long shadows across the meadow. The conversation turned more serious. Martha Wilson spoke of troubles in town, how Ace's influence seemed to grow stronger each day. Elijah cleared his throat, standing tall before their small group of friends. "Seems as good a time as any to speak plain," he said, his deep voice steady. "I want you all to know that I intend to make Karen my wife, proper and legal, just as soon as we can arrange it." Karen gasped, her hand flying to her throat. Though they'd grown closer over the months, sharing quiet moments and tender glances, he'd never spoken so boldly of marriage. The guests erupted in cheerful congratulations, but Karen barely heard them through the pounding of her heart. Sarah Henderson hugged her tight, whispering, "It's about time," while Tom Wilson clapped Elijah on the back. The children danced around them, caught up in the excitement, though not fully understanding its meaning. As twilight deepened, their friends loaded up their wagons for the journey home. Josiah had fallen asleep on a bench, the wooden whistle still clutched in his small hand. Karen tucked a blanket around him before joining Elijah outside. They stood together under a canopy of stars, the mountain air growing cool around them. Crickets chirped in the meadow grass, and somewhere in the distance, a whippoorwill called. "Did you mean it?" Karen asked softly, hardly daring to believe. "About making me your wife?" "Every word," Elijah replied, turning to face her. His eyes were gentle in the starlight. "I've known it for months now, just been waiting for the right moment to speak it plain." Karen wrapped her arms around herself, old doubts rising like shadows. "I never thought, after all the cruel things people said, that any man could truly want me as I am." Elijah's rough hand cupped her cheek, turning her face up to his. "I don't see you as others do, Karen. I see you as God made you, beautiful, strong, and worthy of love." The tears she'd been holding back all evening spilled over. Elijah gathered her close as she wept softly, years of hurt washing away in the healing tide of his acceptance. His strong arms held her secure, as steady as the mountains themselves. "Thank you," she whispered against his chest, "for seeing me, truly seeing me." The stars wheeled overhead, witnesses to their quiet joy. In the cabin behind them, Josiah slept peacefully, the wooden whistle a testament to the love that had found them all on this remote mountain. Karen's heart felt full to bursting, grateful beyond words for this unexpected gift of belonging and acceptance. The mountain nights grew shorter as summer progressed, but this particular evening stretched endlessly. Karen sat beside Josiah's bed, pressing a cool cloth to his burning forehead. His small face, usually animated with curiosity, lay still against the pillow, flushed with fever. It had started at supper. Josiah barely touched his stew, complaining of feeling tired. Within hours, he collapsed while trying to reach the water bucket, his skin blazing hot to the touch. Karen's heart nearly stopped at the sight of her boy crumpled on the cabin floor. "Mama?" Josiah's weak voice quavered in the lamplight. "Everything hurts. Hush now, sweetheart. Karen smoothed back his damp hair, fighting to keep her voice steady. Elijah's gone to fetch Dr. Wilkins. Just rest easy. Outside, thunder rumbled across the peaks. Karen pulled the quilt higher around Josiah's shoulders, remembering another stormy night when illness had taken her husband. Fear clawed at her throat as she watched her son's labored breathing. The hours crawled by. Karen sang hymns softly, prayed constantly, and changed the cool cloths as they grew warm against Josiah's skin. Near dawn, hoofbeats approached the cabin. Elijah burst through the door, his coat dripping. Dr. Wilkins close behind. The doctor's examination was thorough, but his expression grew grimmer with each passing minute. He listened to Josiah's chest, felt his glands, and checked his eyes before straightening up with a heavy sigh. "It's mountain fever," Dr. Wilkins announced, wiping his spectacles. "There's new medicine in Denver that could help, but—" He hesitated, glancing at Elijah. "Whatever the cost," Elijah said firmly. "I'll find a way." Dr. Wilkins shook his head. "The medicine alone costs $50, not counting the journey to fetch it. Time is critical. He needs it within days, not weeks." Karen's heart sank. $50 might as well have been $500. They'd used their savings fighting Asa's land claim, and the winter had been lean. "There must be something else we can do," Karen pleaded, clutching Josiah's small hand. "I'll leave what medicines I have," Dr. Wilkins replied gently. "Keep him cool and try to get water into him. I'm sorry I can't offer more hope." After the doctor left, Karen stayed by Josiah's bedside while Elijah paced the cabin, running his hands through his hair in frustration. The morning light had barely strengthened when heavy boots sounded on the porch. Asa Greeley's bulk filled the doorway, his fancy vest stretched across his chest. A leather medical bag dangled from his fingers. "Heard the boy was sick," he drawled, eyes glittering. "Thought I might help." Karen stiffened while Elijah moved protectively between them. "We don't want your kind of help, Greeley." Asa smiled, cold and calculating. "Now, is that any way to treat a neighbor? Especially one holding the very medicine your boy needs?" He opened the bag, revealing glass vials nested in velvet. "Fresh from Denver by express coach. Cost me a pretty penny. But what's money between friends?" "Name your price," Elijah growled, though they all knew he couldn't match whatever sum Asa named. "Oh, I don't want money?" Asa's gaze fixed on Karen. "I want the widow as my wife." The cabin fell silent except for Josiah's labored breathing. Karen felt the blood drain from her face. "You're a devil," she whispered. "I'm a businessman, making a fair offer." Asa set the bag on the table. "Marry me instead of this mountain rat, and your boy gets the medicine he needs." "Refuse," and he shrugged. "Well, mountain fever's a harsh way to die." Elijah lunged forward, but Karen caught his arm. "Violence would only make things worse. You have until sundown to decide," Asa continued, adjusting his hat. "Though I wouldn't wait too long." "Boy's looking mighty peaked. Boy's looking mighty peaked." After he left, Karen's legs gave way. Elijah caught her, holding her close as she sobbed against his chest. His arms trembled with rage and helplessness. "I'll find another way," he promised hoarsely. "I'll sell everything, beg every neighbor." "He knows there isn't time," Karen whispered. "Oh God, what am I going to do? I can't let my boy die, but the thought of leaving you." Fresh tears overwhelmed her. Elijah pressed his lips to her hair, his own eyes wet. "We'll face this together. The Lord won't abandon us now." But as Josiah's fever climbed through the afternoon, Karen felt her faith wavering. She watched her son struggle for each breath, knowing that somewhere in town, Asa Greeley waited with the medicine that could save him. The choice before her was impossible, her son's life or the love she'd finally found. Either way, her heart would break. The night stretched endlessly as Karen knelt beside Josiah's bed, her knees aching against the rough wooden floor. Moonlight filtered through the cabin's small window, casting shadows across her son's feverish face. His breathing came in shallow gasps, each one a knife to her heart. "Please, Lord," she whispered, clasping her hands tight. "Show me the way. I cannot lose him." The hours crawled by. Karen dabbed Josiah's forehead with cool claws, singing hymns in a trembling voice whenever he stirred restlessly. As false dawn began to paint the eastern sky, she reached her decision. Rising stiffly, she crossed to where Elijah slept in his chair by the fire. "Elijah," she touched his shoulder gently. His eyes opened instantly, alert despite his exhaustion. "I cannot let my boy die." Elijah stood, his face etched with concern. Taking her hands in his weathered ones, he spoke with quiet conviction. "We will not surrender to Asa's cruel bargain, Karen. There must be another way." "But what if there isn't?" Her voice broke. "Every hour that passes, Josiah grows weaker." Instead of arguing, Elijah lowered himself to his knees, drawing her down beside him. "Then we'll seek wisdom together." His deep voice filled the dim cabin as he prayed, asking for guidance, strength, and mercy for Josiah. Karen listened, tears sliding down her cheeks. Though comfort warmed her briefly, as the morning wore on and Josiah's fever climbed higher, desperation drove her to action. While Elijah went to check their dwindling supply of willow bark tea, she sat at the rough table with paper and pencil. Her hand trembled as she wrote, "Dearest Elijah, forgive me, but I must go to Asa. A mother's duty must come before her heart's desire. Know that my love for you has given me more joy than I ever thought possible. Take care of Josiah when he's well. Help him understand why I had to do this. With all my heart, Karen." She folded the note carefully, pressing it to her lips. Before she could rise to leave it where he would find it, the cabin door burst open. Elijah stood there, breathing hard, clutching a telegram in his hand. "The land agent," he gasped. "He's coming from Denver. The telegram says he's already on his way. Should arrive by tomorrow's stage." Karen stared at him, her heart thundering. "The land agent? But when did you?" "Weeks ago, I filed a formal complaint about Asa's claim." Elijah crossed to her, gripping her shoulders gently. "I've been gathering evidence, testimonies from other ranchers he's cheated. The agent's bringing federal marshals with him." Hope flickered in Karen's chest, fragile as a camel flame. She glanced at the note on the table, then quickly slipped it into her pocket. "But Josiah, can he hold on that long?" As if in answer, a weak cough came from the bedroom. They hurried to his side. Josiah's face burned with fever, his small chest rising and falling rapidly. "We'll keep fighting," Elijah said firmly, dipping a fresh cloth in cool water. "Hour by hour, minute by minute if we have to." Through the long afternoon, they took turns bathing Josiah's face and chest, coaxing sips of water between his cracked lips. Karen found herself watching the sun slow crawl across the cabin floor, each moment stretching like molasses. Her hand sought Elijah's frequently, drawing strength from his steady presence. "I almost gave up," she confessed softly as evening approached. "I wrote you a goodbye note." Elijah's fingers tightened around hers. "I know. I saw you writing it." He touched her cheek gently. "Your love for Josiah humbles me, Karen, but we're stronger together than apart." They sat vigil as darkness fell again, watching Josiah's restless sleep. Karen felt torn between crushing despair and tentative hope. The land agent's arrival might stop Asa's schemes, but would it be soon enough? She clung to her faith and Elijah's quiet strength as the night deepened around them, each keeping their prayers for morning like a shield against the dark. Hoofbeats thundered through the mountain pass as Mr. Caldwell, the land agent from Denver, approached the cabin. His leather satchel bounced against his side, heavy with documents. Behind him rode two federal marshals, their badges glinting in the morning sun. Karen watched from the cabin doorway, her hand pressed to her throat. Elijah stepped forward to greet them, his stance wary but hopeful. "Mr. Boone," Caldwell called out, dismounting with a grunt. "I came as quickly as I could." He pulled papers from his satchel, spreading them on a nearby stump. "Your claim is ironclad. Filed properly, witnessed correctly, and paid in full 5 years ago." Relief washed over Karen's face as Elijah examined the documents. The marshals stood nearby, hands resting easily on their gunbelts. "Greeley's purchase was fraudulent," Caldwell continued, his voice hard. "He filed using forged papers and a false name. We've tracked similar schemes in 3 other territories." Before they could discuss further, thundering hooves announced Asa Greeley's arrival. He burst into the clearing, his face purple with rage. "Those papers mean nothing," he shouted, jabbing a finger at Caldwell. I paid good money for this land." "Paid who, Mr. Greeley?" Caldwell asked calmly, "because it wasn't the territory office. We have no record of any legal transaction." Asa's face twisted. He turned to the small crowd gathering at the edge of the clearing, merchants and townspeople drawn by the commotion. "You all know me. I built this territory. Are you going to let some government man destroy everything we've worked for?" But something had changed in the townsfolk's faces. They looked away from Asa's pleading gaze, shame darkening their features. Karen saw Mrs. Peterson, the boarding house matron who had turned them away months ago, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. "We were wrong." Tom Miller, the general store owner, spoke up. "Wrong to follow your lead. Wrong to treat decent folks with cruelty." He stepped forward, holding out a paper bag. "Brought medicine for the boy. Should have done it days ago." Others moved forward, too, carrying baskets of food and supplies. Sarah Jenkins brought fresh baked bread, still warm from her oven. The blacksmith's wife offered jars of preserved fruit. "No!" Asa roared. "You're all fools. I made this town what it is. You made us forget our Christian charity," Reverend Wallace said quietly. "Made us turn our backs on a widow and her sick child. That shame is on all our heads." The marshals moved closer to Asa, their presence a clear warning. Caldwell held up the official documents. "Mr. Greeley, you have 24 hours to vacate any claims to this property. After that, you'll face federal charges for land fraud." Karen hurried inside at a weak sound from Josiah. Her hand shook as she measured out the medicine Tom Miller had brought. "Here, sweetheart," she whispered, lifting Josiah's head. "Drink this for Mama." The boy swallowed obediently, his skin still hot but his breathing already seeming easier. Karen pressed her forehead to his small hand, tears of gratitude flowing freely. "Thank you, Lord," she prayed aloud. "Thank you for your mercy." When she returned outside, Asa was gone. Elijah stood talking quietly with Caldwell while the neighbors arranged their gifts on the cabin's small porch. The atmosphere had transformed. Where there had been tension, now lay peace. Where there had been judgment, now lay contrition. "We'll bring more food tomorrow," Mrs. Peterson promised, squeezing Karen's hand. "And company too, if you'll have us." "You're welcome here," Karen said softly, meaning it. "All of you." Word spread quickly through Willow Creek. By sunset, people gathered at the saloon reported seeing Asa Greeley loading his wagon, his face dark with fury. Where once he had received fawning attention, now he faced turned backs and whispered accusations. "Good riddance," the saloon keeper muttered, and heads nodded in agreement. Back at the cabin, Karen sat beside Josiah's bed, relief making her limbs heavy as his fever finally broke. She sang softly, watching his peaceful sleep. Elijah's reflection appeared in the window glass as he stood in the doorway. "How is he?" he asked quietly. "Better." Karen smiled through tears. "Much better." Elijah moved to stand behind her chair, his strong hands gentle on her shoulders. "We're home now," he said simply. "Truly home." Karen reached up to cover his hand with hers, feeling the rough calluses earned through years of honest work. Outside, the mountain air carried the scent of pine and approaching autumn. Inside, love and healing filled every corner of the cabin, no longer just a shelter, but a sanctuary made holy by faith, perseverance, and the triumph of truth over deceit. Autumn painted the mountains in gold and crimson as wedding preparations filled the busy days. Karen sat by lamplight each evening, carefully stitching her dress from cream-colored muslin. Though plain compared to fancy store-bought gowns, the simple lines suited her perfectly. She'd embroidered tiny flowers along the collar and cuffs, each stitch a prayer of gratitude. "Mama, you look like an angel," Josiah declared, watching her try on the finished dress. His cheeks, once pale with fever, now glowed with health as he bounced on his toes. Karen smoothed the fabric, fighting happy tears. "Thank you, sweetheart. Now let's practice your special job again." Josiah solemnly picked up a bunch of dried flowers, holding them carefully as he'd been taught. He'd taken his role as flower bearer seriously, practicing his walk up and down the cabin's plank floor until he had it just right dot outside. The steady rhythm of Elijah's hammer rang through the crisp mountain air. He'd been working from sunrise to sunset, replacing worn shingles and checking every board of their cabin. Karen often caught him standing back, studying their home with thoughtful eyes, as if seeing the future within its sturdy walls. The changes in town were just as remarkable as the seasons turning. Where once there had been whispers and turned backs, now neighbors stopped by daily with wedding gifts. Mrs. Peterson brought sacks of flour and sugar for the wedding cake. The quilting circle presented Karen with a magnificent wedding quilt, each square stitched with care and blessing. Even Tom Miller's wife, Sarah, arrived with boxes of candles to light your way forward, she'd said with a warm smile. On the morning of the wedding, Karen stood before her small mirror, hands trembling as she pinned up her hair. The old shame tried to creep in, memories of cruel words and mocking laughter. But when she looked at her reflection, she saw what Elijah had always seen, a woman of strength and grace, worthy of love. "Ready, Mama?" Josiah appeared in his Sunday best, fairly bursting with excitement. He clutched his little bouquet of dried autumn flowers, bound with a blue ribbon. "Ready as I'll ever be," Karen answered, taking his small hand. They stepped out into the bright October morning. The path to town had never seemed so beautiful, with fallen leaves crunching beneath their wagon wheels and the air sharp with wood smoke. As they approached the white-painted church, Karen's heart quickened at the sight of gathered townspeople. But instead of the jeers she'd once feared, she saw only genuine smiles and welcoming faces. Elijah waited by the church steps, tall and strong in his new black coat. His eyes found Karen's, steady as the mountains themselves. When he took her hand, his gentle grip anchored her racing heart. "Never thought I'd see such happiness," Karen whispered as they stood before the church doors, the bell tolling joyfully above them. Elijah's voice was rough with emotion as he answered, "Love finds those who are willing to be found, Karen. The Lord led us to each other, plain as any trail I've ever followed." Josiah beamed up at them both, his small face shining with pure joy. The church bell rang out once more, calling them forward into their new life together. Karen squeezed Elijah's hand, feeling all the old hurts falling away like autumn leaves, leaving only love's sweet promise behind. Sunlight streamed through the church's tall windows, casting rainbow patterns through the stained glass onto the wooden floor. The small space hummed with quiet anticipation as neighbors filled every pew. Karen stood in the doorway, her cream-colored homespun dress catching the morning light. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped her bouquet of dried mountain flowers. Josiah stepped forward proudly, his small chest puffed out with importance as he took the flowers from his mother. His eyes sparkled with joy as he began his careful walk down the aisle, just as they'd practiced. The congregation smiled at his solemn expression, some dabbing at their eyes already dotted the altar. Elijah stood tall in his pressed black coat, his usually weathered face soft with emotion. As Karen began her walk forward, his steady gaze never wavered from her. In his eyes shone a love so pure and deep that Karen felt her fears melt away like spring snow. Pastor Matthews opened his well-worn Bible, his kind voice filling the church. We gather today to celebrate not just the union of two hearts, but the blessing of a family formed by choice and strengthened by grace. He spoke of second chances, of how God's love could heal old wounds and create new beginnings. Sometimes, he said, the strongest families are those bound not by blood, but by the daily choice to love and cherish one another. When the time came for vows, Elijah's deep voice rang clear and true. Karen May, I promise before God and these witnesses to love you exactly as you are, to protect you and Josiah with all I have, and to thank the Lord every day for leading you both to my door. Karen's voice shook as she responded. Elijah Boone, I promise to trust in your love, to make our cabin a true home, and to walk beside you in faith through whatever paths lie ahead. There wasn't a dry eye in the church as Pastor Matthews pronounced them husband and wife. Elijah's kiss was gentle and reverent, bringing fresh tears to Karen's eyes. The new family stepped out into the bright autumn day, greeted by cheers and scattered flower petals. Children rushed forward, surrounding Josiah with laughter and congratulations. Neighbors who had once turned away now pressed forward to shake Elijah's hand and embrace Karen, their words warm with genuine joy. That evening, the cabin glowed with lamplight as the family gathered around their table. Steam rose from bowls of Karen's hearty stew, and fresh-baked bread filled the air with its homey scent. Josiah's clear voice rose in prayer. Thank you, God, for Mama and Elijah and our home. And thank you for making us a real family. Karen leaned against Elijah's strong shoulder, watching the lamplight play across Josiah's earnest face. All the cruel words and sideways glances that had once haunted her seemed to belong to another lifetime. Here, in this moment, she knew only peace, surrounded by the love of her husband and son. Grace had indeed made them a family, stronger than blood, bound by choice and faith and unconditional love. If this story made you pause, reflect, or even smile, don't forget to subscribe. I post daily, and the next story might be exactly what you need to hear.